tried something new today, and it almost worked perfectly. Worked a little bit imperfectly, but that's okay. Hey, welcome everybody. So I'm going to open up the mics here in just a moment, but I wanted to welcome everybody to this special product copy book club session. This is a first for us, and we're really excited. We're about the late last year, we started a new product copy book club as kind of part of what we do. And the book that we started the year off with this year was Matt Wallert's Start at the End. And that came up in a vote. We did a vote among the book club members, which was a very small group to start with, but has grown massively since we started this book. And this was the book that came up as the most interesting. And if you haven't been reading along, it's okay. You're going to love today's chat anyway. And so what we wanted to do as we finished up the book earlier this month, we invited Matt to come join us and do a Q&A and talk a little bit about some of the things that he's been talking about learning and teaching with regards to using behavioral science as part of your innovation process. And the book is a lot of fun, and it really takes this concept that's very scary and brings it into a very real place where you can use it as a professional, you can use it in all walks of your life. I'm not going to talk any more than that. What I do want to do is I want to thank our sponsors who make all of this possible. And I'll drop some information in the chat here as well. But we want to thank Method. We want to thank Genuine Parts Company. We want to thank Sophion. And we want to thank the Product Management University. And we want to thankfully, of course, thank FeatureUpvote.com, provides our ideas portal. With that being said, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to actually turn over the mic to Allison Herbert, who is one of our chief instigators of our book club. We got a few Product Coffee members who have really taken the reins on this, and Allison has really been kind of circling the wagons and leading off and instigating this first round, and reached out to Matt to invite him to join us. So Allison is going to be our moderator today. I want to thank you, Allison, for all that you have done, and I'm going to now enable everybody to unmute themselves as needed, and take it away, Allison.
Thanks, Jason. Awesome. I really do appreciate that new title. It's going to fit us well, I think, for today's conversation. I'm really looking forward to kicking off the discussion with everybody here. I know we've got folks on the YouTube live stream as well following us along. So I'm really looking forward to kicking this off. To get us started today, for those of you that are with us on Zoom, I'd like to open with a prompt. And the prompt is, what behavior would you like to change? So if you want to pop that in chat, what behavior?
Wait, clarifying question, Allison. My own or someone else's?
I'm leaving it open. Go where you must. Go where you must. What behavior would you like to change? And we'll just wait for a few of those to come in. I've done this in a countdown before, and sometimes that's a little chaotic. So just looking to get folks thinking about behavior change. Awesome. Okay. With that said, we'll get started. We do have some time, and we have some pre-baked questions from the folks in the book club discussion that have given us some information. So there's going to be some pre-shared questions, but then also we'll open up the channel or the chat for some conversation as we go through. We're here to have fun. I encourage you all to use the chat, use your reactions, engage with us as you can, and we will hopefully get things kicked off here now. All right. So I don't see, okay, Jason's got one. Waiting for permission. I like that. That's a good one. Can also get you in trouble, Jason. So I can see where that comes from. Awesome. Okay. Anyone else for a behavior change while you're thinking about it? Don't let Jason be the only one. Okay. And so have my nurses to use the app to find shifts. So that's a good one too. I like that. Thanks,
Jackie's very familiar with that.
Awesome. Okay.
Breeze. Hey, Manish.
Anybody else on the behavior you'd like to change? All right. So we know with the book itself, Start at the End, How to Build Products That Create Change. Matt, I'll let you kick us off here. Behavior statements are something that come up early and frequently, I'm sure, in these conversations. I'd love to get your thoughts on behavior change.
On behavioral statements. So I just threw one in the chat for those that you admitted that not everybody has read the book. So
Yeah.
I'll throw in the chat. So
Yeah.
let's actually back up from behavioral statements for a second, because I know some people also had organizational questions, and I'm going to try and combine the two. So all businesses are really three things, right? There's a business model, a behavior model, and then some sort of operational model. So what do I mean by that? When I say a business model, I mean, if I could snap my fingers and make this behavior happen, we would make money, right? Maybe it's subscription, maybe it's get flu shots if you're an insurance company, who knows what it is, right? But there's some set of behaviors where we're saying these are monetizable behaviors. That is not what I do, right? So I can't tell you that a flu shot's going to make us money. I can't tell you that we're going to make money through a subscription or how we're going to make money. There's a whole world of monetizable behaviors out there I don't know, right? So that's a part of the business outside of what I do. Then there's a behavior model. So once somebody says, hey, Matt, if we get people to get flu shots, we're going to make money. Cool. I'm going to get people to make flu shots. I'm going to figure out, how do you actually cause that to be true in the world? How do you get people to get flu shots? But I'm going to do that at a small pilot sort of validated way, right? I'm going to understand how that happens and how we're going to create it. But then there's an operational bit that's about scaling that in an efficient way across large enough populations and in an economically effective way so that we get to a good place. The reason that we write a behavioral statement, right, is to facilitate the handoff between the first and second part of those of that, right? I need a way for the business to say in a pretty precise way, hey, when I snap my fingers and we're going to monetize a behavior, what is the behavior in a really precise way? How are we measuring it? Who are we talking about? Who's doing the behavior? So a behavioral statement is just a formalized way of taking in a project from the part of the business that says, this is how we make money. Does that make sense? And I think when you think of it that way, it contextualizes it a little better. It's essentially defining the ruler of success. It's saying, hey, Matt, I have no idea how behavioral science is going to get this thing to occur, but if you get it to occur, we're good, right? Like your job is done. That's why I like this three interlocking model, because it makes it abundantly clear what part of the business is having trouble, right? If we figure out how to get people flu shots and successfully get everybody to get flu shots, so meaning, the behavior model and the operational model work, and we still don't make money, then that's a business model problem, right? If, on the other hand, we can't figure out how to get people to get flu shots in the first place, that's a behavior model problem. And if we can figure out how to get people to get flu shots and we make money from flu shots, but we can't actually scale that, that's an operational problem. So it makes it easier to hold people accountable across the parts of the business for really clear outcomes that they own, as opposed to what I often see, which is this sort of circular firing squad where the business isn't working and all the leaders point at each other and say sort of like, your part's the part that's not working. I like objective things where it's like, no, like when it's my fault, I want to know it's my fault. When it's not my fault, I don't want anybody to point at me.
Yeah, I think that's something that I really pulled out of this book is the ability to get binary on it. Either it is or it's not. Either it's working or it's not. And I know maybe I'll share a product pain point is, but very easily we get turned around into larger organizational discussions and things can get very non-binary for us. So I appreciate that perspective there.
Yeah,
awesome.
I think that's part of science, right? Like, we all learn the scientific method in 8th grade and then promptly forget it, right? And I think we need to bring it back, right? We live in a nuanced world for sure, and there's lots of grays and things, but the whole point of business is typically to create binaries out of things. Either it works or it doesn't, right? Because businesses live or die by their ability to create binary outcomes. Live or die is a binary outcome.
Yeah. Awesome. So we do have, I have to probably disclose first business of Troublemaker. We have a other Matt in conversation with us today. And so you'll hear me say other Matt if I'm referring to a conversation that's not you, but other Matt's got a couple of comments here in the chat that I would like to pull forward. I think one of the early, it's went by me here. Go.
When she says, F you, Matt, she really means me.
The other Matt. Yeah, it's the other Matt I'm talking to.
I'm just surprised that you didn't give a trigger warning for the book, man. It has all sorts of things in it. So,
we talked about it. I was like, I opened it up. I was like, I'm going to do book club. This will be a great thing to do. And then I opened it up and it was, oh no, this has got language. I hope everybody's okay with that. So that was a delightful discovery for me. I think everybody probably has adjusted to it as we've gone through. So yeah, awesome.
You did not withhold any of your opinions in the first 2 chapters.
No, I didn't pull any. They said, write the book you want to write. I said, great, I will. So Matt,
That's right.
I like that you're pulling forward this tendency for people to push features over outcomes, right? The whole point of, the hardest thing to write about the book was the damn title. But it really is that sort of like, no, what matters is where we're going and then working backwards for that. And the human tendency to leap to solutioning and to fall in love with a singular solution and to, this is my big gripe with design thinking, and it's sort of dot vote-y, sticky version of the world, is that it often, the sexiest idea wins. And that is always a warning sign for me, because if you look at a lot of science, man, it does not tremendously sexy, right? Like it's just not. Like really boring things work a lot of the time. But there's this tendency to believe that like, well, you're only really doing your job if you're finding some creative new way to do things. I don't know if the old way works, I'm sticking with it. Like maybe I'm just lazy, but I don't think that creativity is the outcome. I think that the outcome is the outcome.
Yeah, that's a great point. And right, Holly, I hear you reflecting some of that sentiment there in the chat. Don't fix what's not broken. If it works, let it work. And right, you talked about that in the book as well. So like when we come back and adjust, like, is it time to look at it, or is it, if it's working well enough for us, do we keep moving forward?
Well, yeah, and I like your point too, because customers do unexpected things with software, and science often happens by accident. Some of the best results that we've seen in science have happened as a result of just a coincidence or accident.
But the good thing about science is it doesn't just let it stay a coincidence, right? It starts to pull on that and say, well, why is this happening? What's replicable here? How do I create a theory out of this? Where's the hypothesis in it? And that's the thing that it's interesting. A couple of years ago, leading up to the Super Bowl, the Clios, which is like the Academy, the Oscar
advertising,
for advertising, did a series of videos about like the best Super Bowl ads over time. And they asked a bunch of different experts to come in and talk about why they worked. And so they asked me to come in and talk about, from a behavioral science perspective, why do these advertisements work? And what's interesting is, they worked, but when you saw the advertiser creative people talk about why they worked, it isn't clear that they knew why they worked, right? They were just like, it's a good ad, right? Like it was very successful. I'm like, cool, why? And they're like, I don't know. The team had a good idea and then we ran with it. I'm like, great. So your ability to create good ads is now as good as you are at guessing, like epiphany-based design. It just feels so unsatisfying as a product person.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. All right, let's see. I'm trying to keep up with the chat here. You guys are doing a great job of keeping the conversation going. I want to click on behavior statements just a bit more. We really had a great exercise as part of the discussion of building our own behavior statements. And then from a perhaps organizational challenge on our part, right? We all come from different places in product, but how many behavior statements should an organization have? Should a team have? Should a product have? Is there a rule of thumb there or recommendation from your standpoint?
So the company has only one at its highest level. So it's a waterfall diagram. And I know lots of people don't like waterfalls for lots of reasons. And there are lots of scarring around waterfalls. And I recognize why that is, but like
sure.
An org chart's a waterfall, right? Yeah. And your behavioral statements should align against an org chart. Ideally, everybody, if you just took your org chart, everybody on the org chart has a behavioral statement that is inherited by everybody underneath them, right? So if I'm the CEO of Uber, when people want to go somewhere, they will take an Uber. That is the macro behavioral statement for the company, and everything we do should lay up to this. If you're doing OKRs as an example, same thing, right? Like everything should layer up to this. And so then I go to Jackie, who's the CMO of Uber, and I say, okay, your job is to get people to download the app. You don't have to get them to use it. That's not your problem. Your job is downloads. And then I go to, let's see, who else is, I go to Justin. I say, Justin, your job, you're the product person. You don't have to worry about downloads. Jackie's got that, right? Like that's her behavioral statement. Your job is, if they have the app on the phone, they're using it to schedule rides, right? And we could keep going down this, right? Manesh is going to be in charge of rider experience. So once they're in the car, you take over, right? And so in theory, everybody has only one behavioral statement. I always teach people in class, like, if I see an and, I'm going to lose my mind, right? You can't have an and in a behavioral statement, because the moment you have an and,
It's somebody else's job.
well, we're going to get in a weird fight about like
Mhm.
where the accountability lies. So if I give, let's say Manesh works for me, and, I set a behavioral statement that is like about both logins and rides, right? So it's not falsifiable. How do I hold him accountable? If he gets 100% logins but no rides, did he do the job or not do the, like, I don't know how to hold him accountable for that, right? A lot of this has to do with nesting. So I'll give you actually a good example, which I think is in the book. Do I talk about the Yammer example in the book?
I'm not sure. I know we did a lot of Uber, M&Ms, and the
So
flu shot.
Microsoft buys Yammer,
Mhm.
and
Or you did Bing, I think, was your example. So that, yeah.
so Microsoft buys Yammer. It's not going terribly well, so I sort of go down there and get all the Yammer product people in a room, and we're talking. And what I discovered is they were essentially two camps. So half the Yammer people are designing for Mark. Mark logs into Yammer every single day. He is the most engaged person you've ever seen. He comments, he replies, he posts shit, he likes shit. He's all over, right? Elliot logs into Yammer only one time in his entire career, says only one thing, but it drives massive business value. And half of the people thought they were building for Mark, and half of the people thought they were building for Elliot, right? And what they discovered in conversation is actually they agreed that they were building for Elliot. That is, that the point of Yammer was to create business value through communication, right? So business value was the reason to do it. And what happened to the people who like Mark is their just assumption was, well, if I get people to engage, it will lead to business value, which is totally fine. But that just implies a hierarchy. It implies that if I could prove to you that mere engagement did not lead to this, then you would be willing to pivot away from it, right? So really what we're talking about in the behavioral statement is the incontrovertible pivot point, where I don't know how I would get it. I might have hypotheses about how I would get it. But if you prove to me that A did not lead to B, I would abandon A because B is really the thing I care about, right? Same thing in Uber, right? Like if you could prove to me, obviously this is untrue. I don't know how this would be true. But if you could prove to me that people having the app on their phone didn't lead to people get riding in cars, then I would abandon that as a goal. I would say, great, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do something else, right? And so there's that linkage effect that I think, you're going to write a lot of behavioral statements. The other value of that is being able to trickle down to, Jason is my summer intern. I can create a behavioral statement all the way down here that he is simultaneously accountable and autonomous within, but also levers all the way back up. So Jason can say, because I live in Jackie's CMO world, I know my job is downloads. So I've been given this thing that is like, get young women in LA to download it. I know how that levers up to Jackie. I know how Jackie levers up to John, who's going to be the CEO, right? Like I can see that connection. And so Allison, I'm fine with there being as many behavioral statements as you want, as long as
aligns to the vision. Yeah.
There's a clear through line, right? There can't be anything that doesn't have a clear through line. And there can't be anything that sort of has multiple, there needs to be one behavioral statement, not and.
Yeah, I like that. I just want you to know you have completely obliterated whatever company you just built because you put the wrong people in charge and many roles there in that description. So,
well, I've heard that Jason is not going to be a good summer intern. So now I know what, Jason. Sorry, man, I'm going to have to reject your application.
Had a couple of fits, but certainly a couple of misses there. So, I think one other burning question that came from us. Size and considerations, and I think you may have addressed this with the ampersand. So like if you got several commas, a full grocery list in your statement, guess what's wrong? The size of your statement. Is there anything else that you would encourage us to be mindful of when we're like, I want to solve world peace? Like level stuff there for statements.
Yeah, there's a couple pieces in there. So one, I always tell people take on the most ambitious behavioral statement that you can actually accomplish, right? So it should be as large as you can get, but not so large that you wouldn't be willing to be fired over the result of it, right? So it has to be, you have to be able to control the levers of the thing. I do. So I'll say 3 things. One, I think, you want as ambitious as you can, that's still achievable. 2, you want to really make sure it's a behavior. So a lot of times, CEOs will push for things. Well, I want people to love the product. I don't know what I don't know what love means.
Love means a lot of things to a lot of people. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, do you mean like the product, like use the product, sell the product, buy the product, recommend the product? Like, what is love for you? Like, and then as a third bucket, really holding the line on that, right? Like, refuse to start the project until there is clarity. And you have to be willing as a leader to sort of say, I will hold it up as long as I have to for you to reach alignment. And it could be a disagree and commit situation, right? But like, someone has to accept responsibility for this being the behavioral statement defined in this way. And we're not going to start until you do that, right?
Yeah. Good point there. One last behavioral statement, burning question from our book club folks. What was the behavior statement for the flu shot example?
It was when Clover members, I can't remember the limitations exactly. I think we made some geographic limitations about where they had to live, like they had to be within a certain thing.
Right.
I think we also said that we have to know their primary care physician, right? If we didn't know who their PCP was, we couldn't necessarily figure out if they had already gotten a shot or not.
Right, that's the second part of whether they got the letter and then they got the shot part.
Yeah, exactly. So there were some limitations about, like, if we don't know who their PCP is, we're going to exempt them from this group. When they want to do the things that are most important to them, they will get a flu shot as measured by percentage of people who and I believe we cared about flu shot claims in the pilot, although ultimately we don't care about flu shot. Didn't think we cared about flu shot claims as a business. But I think for the pilot, we scoped it down.
Okay. Cool.
But I mean, everything has a behavioral statement. I may not articulate it, but I mean, even the book has a behavioral statement, right? The book is an intervention to try and get you to do something, right? This talk is an intervention to try and get you to do something. You guys as a community are trying to get each other to do things all the time, right? Like, that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
And so, I think making that explicit aids in that handoff piece.
Okay. Awesome. I'm going to pause here and just see if anybody has any other last questions on behavioral statements. I don't want to scope it too tightly, but just before we move on there, I don't want to go all the way to the end and then lose some thoughts there while we're talking. That's going to do a dance for us while you wait. Yes. How do we get going with this in B2B? Okay, that's a good question.
So I actually don't think B2B is any different than B2C. There is still a specific person. You want to do a specific thing, right? Like, I get this question all the time, especially at Techstars for some reason. Like, Techstars people like see this talk and then are like, yeah, but it doesn't apply to B2B. I'm like, why the hell not? Like, someone somewhere is doing something. Someone's buying it. Like, what may be different about B2B rather than B2C is you may have very different audiences. Remember that waterfall of behavioral statements? You may have very different audience statements throughout that. So I'll give you the following example of Laurel. So Laurel is an automated timekeeping solution for businesses where people bill directly for their time. So lawyers, accountants, et cetera, right? There's a part of the business over here that needs the business stakeholders to say, this is going to be our automated time system and we're going to buy it, right? That's very different than the part of the business that says people are going to log their time and release it, right? If we use the Uber example, someone has to own the account, the behavioral statement that is the drivers, right? And so in a B2B business, one of the things you will see is that often the target audience changes between parts of the business. Whereas in a more B2C business, often it's the same consumer is downloading the app, using the app, paying, writing, like, so the audience may change more in B2B businesses, but it is still some human somewhere doing a thing.
Yeah. All right, other Matt, I saw you come on camera. Are you going to grace us with a question?
I think I dumped it in the chat there, but I was just curious, Matt Wallaert, when do you see it necessary to bring in a behavioral scientist or a team of behavioral scientists to support a behavioral change initiative in product?
So I'll put in a plug for, I just literally yesterday released like this was a great exercise for a friend. I have a longer thing that I'm working on around behavioral science teams, literally with like job postings and interview guides and the whole fucking thing, right? Like, and I really want to be thick, but it's been months in the making. And so a friend of mine said, I'm tired of waiting for this thing. Can you just figure out what you can make in 2 hours? Like, just take 2 hours and give me the best you can get in 2 hours. So I took this to heart and I tried to make like a 2-hour guide to behavioral science, which I just linked there. And it really has a whole section, Matt, on team. So in it, I posit there are 6 behavioral scientists, right? There is a behavioral science leader who's sort of the executive managing this part. And in the business, that could be the chief product officer if they have enough experience. You know, she has enough experience running the business and enough experience in behavioral science. Like, it doesn't have to be called the head of behavioral science, but there is a leader who's sort of saying, like, running roughshod over the top of this process, right? So this could be cross-trained people. It could be people who came up through behavioral science. It doesn't really matter to me. And then within the team, there's really five folks, right, that align against the things we've been talking about, right? There's a strategy person whose job it is to make sure that the behavioral statement is right and tight, and like will actually, you know, accepting the ball from the business part of the organization. There are quantitative and qualitative scientists, right? Data scientists use researchers, right? Or business analytics use researchers, right? Who are owning that insights piece. There's some sort of designer, and Matt, this might be the place where you might have to hire externally. This is usually someone, they own the potential interventions. So their deliverable is all of the things that we might do, not the things we're actually going to test, but the things that we might do to change behavior based on the insights that we have. And that's a place where not every business already has somebody, and it's a good place where getting an expert can help. And then you need a PM who like understands experimentation, not A/B testing, but like true experimentation, can run pilots, and they're responsible for handing it back to the operational part of the business, right? And so I often like to recruit them from the operations thing. So if you looked at Clover, we recruited probably 80% of the team internally. So like I took people from our call center, other operational teams, people from our sort of strategy and actuarial teams. Like I stole people from around the business primarily for the strategist and the PM roles. We didn't have quant and qual, so I had to go get it. And then, you know, the designer piece I had to kind of go get. If you already have business analytics and user research, you may only have to really sort of cross-train all of these people, get them into a good process. So, you know, where it is good to get external help, Matt, I think, is when, you know, if you get all those pieces together in an organized process and it's the fit and finish things like, hey, people aren't holding the line to make a behavioral statement that we really can measure. That's where you might need external help, right? Just to sort of, you know, help push back against the business part and say like, no, we really, you know, you got to do this thing. I don't know if that's as satisfying.
I guess to play devil's advocate, so you recruited most of these people internally. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were looking to you as an expert to guide them in how to apply behavioral science.
That's right.
Let's take you out of the equation. Maybe you're not there. Maybe it's someone like one of us who, you know, has been trying to read up on this stuff and maybe apply it. What's your advice for diving off the deep end?
I mean, it's funny. It's perfect. That's literally my next question, Matt. So good job there.
So let me answer it this way, Matt.
Yeah.
Applied behavioral science in business as the way we know it is about 20 years old, right? And that's about as long as I've been in business, right? I left academia, joined my first startup. That's as old as it is. So if you are better off than I was. Everything we figured out in the last 20 years. And so even if all you have done is got everybody to read the book, taken this little 25 slide thing, reorganized them into a team and tried to run the process, you will eventually get where we got. That's the beautiful thing about science, right? Given the same set of facts, you arrive at the same conclusion. And so, you know, look, I make a living out of teaching people how to do this. And so it's like, we dumb to say like, don't consult an expert, but I think, you know, give it a shot. You'll probably learn some things along the way. It'll be imperfect, but you know, you'll jiggle the key and you'll figure it out. So that I think that, it's maybe an unusual answer. You're 100% right, though. They were looking to me to upskill them, in part because a book didn't exist. There weren't people writing. There weren't people speaking. We didn't really have a choice, right? Now, there's enough out there. There are good curriculums, right? There, Ideas 42 has a training. We have a training. Irrational Labs has a training. Like there are master's programs, certificate programs. Like there's a much broader spectrum of educational opportunities than I grew up with, right? Where we just had to figure it out. But if I figured it out, I am not that smart. If I figured it out, you can figure it out.
I appreciate your humility and your as it relates to your intelligence there. I think each one of us were like, are we behavioral scientists? Are we? But are we?
But so for me, now there are different people who feel differently. There are people in my field who are like, if you don't have a PhD, then you're not. Here's what I would tell you. Behavioral science is behavior as an outcome, science as a process. If you were doing those two things, you're a behavioral scientist, right? Mm-hmm. Now you may be contributing to that process in a different way. I am, however, religious about that. So there's another person in the behavioral science community who I frequently get in arguments with. She feels like the insights phase is basically behavioral science. So she would argue, even if you never ran a pilot, you were doing behavioral science. And I would say, no, you did the behavior bit. You didn't do the science bit, right? Like if you did not run some sort of experiment to validate that your idea actually works, you could just be blowing smoke, and that's not science to me. And so to me, you have to be doing those two core essential things. And if you're not, then it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
John says PMs are more therapists than you.
That is a very true statement. Very true statement. I had a therapy session this morning before joining today. So totally appreciate that sentiment.
I mean, I think germane to this topic, what this implies is the difference between strategic project management and technical product management should now be separated in the business, right? Because TPM, like build the thing right, is actually in operations, right? And build the right thing, which is behavioral science, is in this behavioral model part. And so I think one of the biggest evolutions that we can make as a field is disaggregating TPM and sort of behavioral product management and putting them in different parts of the org. Because the looking at the same person and being like, hey, Matt, you should simultaneously be the person who is figuring out the right thing to build and ensuring that we build it the right way. Those are different core skill sets, different accountabilities. Mm-hmm. Like, so many product managers in the world are told, well, you don't control the engineers, but you should influence, you should manage through influence to get them to build. No, fuck that, man. Like either you control them and you can tell them what to do or you don't, right? And if I don't want to be held accountable for them. I'm not held accountable for people that I can't individually hold accountable. And so we have to get TPM out over here onto the operations side of the business and then separate out, the sort of, whether we want to call it strategic project management or behavioral project management or whatever we want to call it, right? That experimentation bit needs to live over here in the behavioral model piece.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I saw some positive sentiments there go by in the chat. Are there any other questions around like that team size, implementation, structural thing topic that we were just kind of exploring there?
I saw one question about unifying around a single North Star. The North Star to me is just the behavioral statement at the top of the org chart, right? Like whatever the behavioral statement that the CEO owns is the North Star. That is the point of the company, right? Like Uber's is get people to ride around in the back of Ubers, right? Like that's what it is, right? And so now that may change. So, Microsoft's changed, right? Microsoft originally was get a computer on every desk, in homes and offices. And then they sort of accomplished that. And so then they had to pivot into the next thing. And that happens, right? Arguably, Uber has changed too, right? Now it's not necessarily people in the back of cars. Sometimes it's food in the back of cars. Sometimes it's thing in the back of so the original behavioral statement of get a person from A to B is now get something from A to B, and something can be lots of different things. And so if Uber tomorrow said, hey, we're going to get in the logistics game and if Uber said tomorrow, we're going to be a truck driving company, I wouldn't be surprised. That's concordant with sort of the evolution of their behavioral statement, right? It is a way of getting things from point A to point B. It's, makes sense with what they, that's not crazy to me. John, I know you had a hand up. What's up, bro?
So you just touched on something that for as long as I have been in software has been an issue, and maybe you can enlighten the practitioners here, because the vast majority of them still wrestle with this today, which is the technical product manager and the non-technical product manager. Companies just think it's okay to put those two into one role, into one person. And for those who have tried to do both, we know it's a recipe for mediocrity. I mean, you can't be good at both, and it just, but companies still do it. Any advice for folks who are in that and trying to get out of it to help their superiors see the light?
I think so. I don't know that I have advice. I have a thought.
Go for it.
Which is, in my experience, limited though it may be, one of the best ways of convincing people of a thing is helping them get to the first principles, like helping them understand why the thing that you're saying is the natural outgrowth of a set of first principles, rather than trying to convince them of the thing itself, right? So if you can get your leaders to buy into this, like, there's figuring out what we're monetizing, there's figuring out how you actually get people to do that, and then there's building the thing that causes that to occur, then it makes it much clearer why a TPM and a behavioral product manager are different, right? So rather than trying to go in and say, hey, I'm trying to explain to you why TPMs and behavioral product managers are different, I'm going to go in and explain to you this sort of mental model of the world, get you to agree to that, and then say, well, the natural outgrowth of that is this. So weirdly, my experience with this comes, convincing people of this comes often from, so I'm a very loud, angry feminist. And so I've spent a lot of my life trying to convince white men that, you know, sort of gender gaps are real. And one of the things that turns out to be very successful tends to be the like first principles approach, where you sort of say like, hey, can I get you, John, to agree that there are a disproportionate number of white men in leadership? Meaning, you know, census representation of men is X. Are there more of them than census representation? And most people will say yes, right? I understand that that is in fact true. I then say, well, so if you believe that, there's only two potential explanations. One is you think white dudes are better than everybody else at leadership, right? So it's a meritocracy, and you actually think there's something about white men that makes them better. Or do you believe that structural sexism and racism are real? And it is a lot easier to do that, right? I first to get you to agree to this thing, and then the logical conclusion of that is these two things, and you don't want to say this one, so I'll get you to say this one, is a lot easier than going in with, hey, you have to admit that structural sexism and racism are real as its own independent good. So if you can get people to agree to the, like, you know, sort of business behavior operations, then I think it becomes clear that TPM is different. The other thing I'll say about this, because I experienced it in a startup recently, is there's also the process thing where you're like, just draw me a diagram of how something moves through the business, right? Like how a problem moves through the business. Like who decides we should work on that? And the CEO is like, well, I'm the one who decides that we should solve this problem. Cool, great. Like who do you go to where, like, just draw me a map, like a process map. And inevitably when they draw the process map and they describe what a person does, I sort of say like, okay, if you were going to draw this from scratch, would you have that person do that thing? And most of the time they sort of go, oh no, right? Like obviously that when I say it, it sounds weird, right? It's like teaching a 7-year-old how grammar works, right? You're like, say it out loud. And if your brain goes, well, that's not right, that's a clue. So I try and get leaders to speak out loud the process, and then often they'll self-correct and go, oh, you're right, that's weird. But also, as you pointed out, John, this problem is as old as you know, sort of the building of things so I have no silver bullets for you.
Darn, we were hoping to get a magical solution there.
How do you know when you've identified the appropriate number of behaviors that you need to assess generally? Is there a rule of thumb on how many iterations you need to go through to get through coverage effectively to know when you have Mark, can we talk about this?
Yeah, I'll apologize in advance. I managed to avoid COVID for 2 years, and that ended Wednesday.
Wait, so I will teach everybody a word. It's a very important word to me. I made it up, or rather I made it up with some other people. And that is apolopoofing, which is apologizing for shit you don't have to apologize for. Mark, please don't pre-apologize for having COVID. I'm so sorry, and I hope you're okay.
If I start coughing, that's why.
So
So as you're looking at an opportunity and you start to try to identify the list of behaviors that you think you need to evaluate for, obviously early on, especially if it's a newer opportunity, it's hard to know what all those behaviors are. So I know you have to go through some process of discovery, start putting together some pilots, and start doing some testing. My concern with that is you could get into this endless loop where you keep digging and digging and digging and digging and digging, and you never get anything done, right? In the meantime, people are screaming and yelling about why you're not getting anything done. So is there any kind of rule, like in some sciences, or rules of thumb that if you go 3 levels, you get 99.5% of things covered? Things like that. So are there any rules of thumb that you feel like generally, if you get to this level, however that's defined, you're probably at a good point to go through a more serious pilot or to roll out an early beta or something like that?
yeah. So thank you for clarifying, because that definitely was not the question I thought you had. So academic behavioral science, right, which attempts to understand humans at a generalizable level, uses this thing called P less than 0.05. And they magically decided that that's significance, which means, for those of you who are not stats people, there is a 95% chance that what I'm observing is real and a 5% chance that it is due to random chance. That's what the 0.05 means, is the 5%. It's less than 5% chance made up, right? Why do I have a student on hand? Because I was going to use it to describe what I thought Mark's question was, but then it turned out to be not the question. So exactly, there is no spoon. I'm going to bend it with my mind. It's actually true that if you ever take a class with me, I reference that scene from The Matrix. And the reason that I reference that, I'm going to answer your question in a second. The reason I reference that scene from The Matrix is because we don't actually change behavior, right? What we do is we change pressures that then change behavior, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so I write a behavioral statement that is, the measurement is the change of behavior, but the thing I'm actually doing is changing the pressures, right? And so I love that scene with the kid, because I sort of talk about like the way he bends the spoon is recognizing that he's bending himself, not the spoon, that like it's the environment around the spoon, not the spoon itself that bends. Same thing. I don't change behavior directly. I just change shit around the spoon that then causes the spoon to want to bend.
Yeah.
Right. So, Mark, academia has decided this stupid P less than 0.05 thing, which is useless to us in business, because academia has no notion of a cost benefit ratio. So my answer is you should be right enough, and enough is defined by the cost benefit ratio of the business. So I typically, when I interview data scientists, because I want to root out this problem early if I'm going to have it. So Jackie, I'm going to pick on Jackie again. I don't know why Jackie, you and me today. So Jackie comes in, she's going to be a behavioral scientist on my team. She's going to be a quant researcher. So I say, Jackie, I have an intervention. It is P.2. So reminder for the non-stat literate, that means there is a 20% chance that it is complete bullshit and does not work, right? I have a thing, P.2, what should I do? Now, if they are an academically trained data scientist, what they will say is, fuck all, right? Like that's way non-significant. You should stop now, right? And what I point out to Jackie is I say, as a prompt, if they don't get there on their own, ideally they get there on their own. If they don't, I will then prompt them and say, well, Jackie, you didn't ask me what the intervention is. Let me tell you about it. It's a little tiny pill. It melts in your mouth, right? Costs 1 penny to produce, has no known side effects, tastes of fucking rainbows and unicorn farts, and cures all known forms of cancer. So I have a magic pill, and there's an 80% chance that it does all the things I just said. Mm-hmm. So, maybe we should keep going, right? Maybe we should do a larger pilot. So I think my answer, Mark, is like whatever the tolerance of the business is. If something is another example that I give, let's do this all together. I have some of you on camera. Let's do it all together. So there's a 0.00000000001% chance that if we all snap together on the count of 3, that we will cure all known forms of cancer, right? So you ready? Everybody, let's get some hands up here. 1, 2, 3, snap. Now, did that work? Probably not, right? But the outcome was so disproportionately good and the effort so disproportionately small is worth trying. So that's sort of my attitude, Mark, to like when to stop is if the outcome is super good and the cost is very low, then you should scale it. Now, The only problem with that is people often misapprehend cost, right? Right? They're like, well, it only costs 10 cents per user. Sure, but someone has to roll it out and someone has to pay attention to it and someone has to measure. There is an instrumental organizational cost to anything that we decide to scale. So we need to bake those into our notion of cost. But if it's easy enough to do, move on.
Yeah. Okay, good.
But there's no magic. Is it point less than, there's no significance level because significance doesn't give a shit about effect size or cost, right? It doesn't care about cost or benefit. And in business, I only care about cost and benefit. That's literally it. It's everything.
Okay, good. Thank you. That helps.
Of course. And feel better soon.
Thank you.
Allison, I've totally hijacked your thing. I apologize.
No, I'm really glad because this is a learning experience for me as well. Like I don't have to drive if the speaker gets to drive himself. So we have one question from the advanced section, and I will not out anybody on this call, but I know several of us did not make it all the way through the book because you told us if we just read the first 8 chapters, we were okay. But in the advanced section, specifically chapter 9 was called Priming, Moderation, and Mediation. Would love to hear your thoughts on why you landed on that name or the rationale behind it for that chapter.
Because it's about mediation and moderation. So mediation and moderation are advanced statistical topics that nobody should ever really learn about, other than that they're actually quite useful. But yeah, that chapter is about sort of trying to understand the difference between mediation and moderation. The best way I can say it is try to think of it as a user journey, right? So there's a user journey where in order to get from A to C, you have to go through B, right? So the only way to C is through B, right? Then there's another version, which is to say A and B are correlated and co-occur. And so both of them are valid predictors of C. So B could be a reagent that would make the connection between A and C stronger, but it is not a necessary component of moving through it, right? And so that chapter talks about sort of how do you detect which of these things is happening and how do you use them in product. Yeah. Okay. That's why they're in the second half of the book. This is
that was not my question. I'll put it out there. So I
think it's a good question. Yeah. It's just clearly for the geeky. It's a little like anytime you write something, particularly something where you're trying to educate an audience with an unknown level of educational about a thing, you inevitably just piss off everybody. So there are lots of people who read my book and are like, man, it's so dense and hard for me and it's really complicated and it's just like above where I feel like I am. And then there are people who write reviews on Amazon and are like, the way you described a t-test is not technically correct for the following. I'm like, oh, fuck you, man. Like, I'm trying to explain a t-test to people who don't know what statistics is. Like, what, but someone out there is really mad about the way that I described t-tests. I think I can't 100% tell from their comment. I think they're technically correct. I think they're right. I didn't say it in the technically correct way. I said it in the functionally correct way.
Yeah. Okay. Jason, shame on you for bringing up recent events.
The mom test. I like that. So I didn't understand the
great. We're going there. Thanks.
Why are we going there about the mom? Why can't we call it the mom test? My parents are a great test. I'm very confused why we're not calling it the mom test, or we're trying to make up new names.
I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. So we had a lovely conversation. So we meet weekly. I'm not sure that you're fully aware of what Product Coffee is, but we meet weekly as a group on Wednesdays, usually in the AM on the East Coast. This week it was West Coast time, and talk through a very wide swath of product related topics, product adjacent topics. And Wednesday, 2 days ago, as an example. Yeah. We had a conversation in chat around understanding how to explain something to folks, to your point, that were unfamiliar or not as well versed in said subject or topic that you are the resident expert on. And so a person referred to it as the mom test. Like, can you explain this to your mom and does it make sense? And so we really should be using instead of mom, because it's not just moms that need to understand it. It may be somebody, it could be a dad, it could be your hairdresser.
Yes,
that kind of thing.
From a pure inclusion perspective, I agree that the thing is misnamed. For what it's worth, I do actually ask my parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think as product folk, we ask anybody that's willing to listen to us at some points, like, hey,
So
I got an idea. What do you think? You know,
So I have a proposal, Allison.
sure.
And it doesn't have a pithy name. We call it the beer test. You ready? This is the beer
Okay.
test.
Okay.
Now I'm going to replace the mom and dad test with the beer test, which also has its own DEI problems. I don't even drink and we're not having beers, but whatever. And that is, how would I explain it to somebody over a beer that didn't understand it, right? Which captures, so one of the things I didn't like about the conversation is we started getting into these very technical, like we started coming up with sort of words that abstracted us from the person. So the beer test has to do with how I actually ask people to prep for talks. So I give a lot of talks worldwide. I'm obviously a relatively fluid speaker. People come to me and they're like, how do you do this? And I said, well, you just get practice at explaining things to people, to a friendly audience. And this is the thing that I think is inherent in the mom test that got lost when people were saying like the uninformed test. The uninformed person may be actively hostile to me. My mom likes me, right? And that's part of the beer test. It's how would you explain it to somebody, not somebody who's actively hostile, but someone who genuinely, good-heartedly wants to understand because they like you and simply is not understanding. That's the thing that is getting captured in the mom test that we're leaving out in the discussion that got had, which is it needs to be an assumed friendly audience. So the beer test is, Manesh and I are friends. He doesn't know shit about behavioral science. So we're going to go out for a beer and I'm going to explain behavioral science to him in the way that I would with a friend over a beer, right? Like it's not a lecture. It's not a user manual. It's assumed that Manesh likes me and genuinely wants to understand this thing because he likes me, right? That's what's getting lost when we rename the mom test is it's a friendly audience who genuinely wants to understand and who you would be talking to in a way that is informal, right? It's not how do you explain something through a user manual. That's not what we mean by the mom test. And so when we start talking about the uninformed person test, it sounds like I'm going to make a textbook, which I'm not, right? Like that's not the point of that test.
I prefer coffee stouts or coffee. So
I don't drink coffee either, so I don't care.
Oh no, you're one of those.
I know. I'm Manesh, the reason I don't use the coffee
How are you
test
alive? Real question.
Not only not am I how alive, how am I this energetic?
Right. Yeah. What is
it's
your
the meth. Never mind. I withdraw the question.
I'm from rural Oregon. It's the meth. This is why my teeth are the way they are. So Manesh, the reason I don't like the coffee test is it's not coffee sometimes is like a business meeting. It's not that. It's like an assumed friendly person that and the thing about it is there is enough entertainment value in the way that I'm explaining this that it wouldn't feel like a chore, right? If Manesh and I are friends and we go out for a beer and I give him a lecture about a topic, he's not having beers with me anymore. We're not friends, right? It builds in this, like there's enough of this thing is intrinsically interesting enough and intrinsically sort of motivating enough. And so that's what I think we're getting at in the mom test is like, could I explain it in a way where the person didn't have to learn? They had the option of opting out and they still enjoyed it enough to want to do it again.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The other thing that came up, Holly, the taco test. I feel like you have used that in real life as well. So that's another way to think about it too. I don't know
the taco test.
Yeah.
We go out for some tacos, but it doesn't get us away from the beverage of choice. And anybody that doesn't eat tacos is a spawn of the devil. So I live in Southern California. I feel very strongly about my tacos. So, because there's a taco for everybody. My girlfriend's vegan.
And they don't take that long to eat. So you've got a time box. I'm not taking you on a night of drinking to explain this problem. It's one beer, one taco. You know, maybe you can have another if you talk fast.
That's right. And I really think that I understand why we have PRDs and the need to explain things in highly technical ways. But we somewhere along the line lost sight of the need to explain things in casual, interesting, storytelling-y ways.
Universal language,
that like people can understand. And I think we got to start there. I think we got to start with the taco test where people are like having a taco, hashing this out over lunch in a casual way with enough entertainment that I would want to do it again.
So Matt W., I think we come to a point where a lot of organizations are doing exactly what you're saying, which is essentially just tell me what you want me to build
and they go through these details, but they don't explain the what and the why behind it. And so that taco test that we're talking about really helps translate that. And if we can head all of our direction towards those taco tests, or write it in the way that we having a taco with a friend, I think it makes a big difference for everybody to understand the what and the why behind it.
I love this, Manesh, and I'll bring it back to Allison's point about behavioral statements. So, right, I'll put it in the thing again, like target audience, limitations, motivation, behavior, data. There is a version of this where we omit limitations and data because they typically get quite long and quite detailed. So when I teach this, I actually, target audience, motivation, and behavior are in one color because they're how the user would describe themselves. So target audience is not 25 to 35-year-old Latina women in LA living in the geographic bounds of LA. It's young Latina women in LA because that's how they would describe themselves, right? Ditto motivation. Motivation is not some highly technical thing. It's if I said to Manesh, hey man, you took an Uber last week. Why'd you do that? Oh, I wanted to go to the doctor, right? I wanted to go somewhere. If I prompt him with the behavior, he generates the motivation and vice versa. So if I say to you, hey, you had to go to the doctor last week. How'd you do it? You'd say, I took an Uber. Not I called an Uber. I ordered an Uber. I used the app. I wouldn't say any of those things. I'd say, I took an Uber, right? So if you take out limitations and data, you then have a very plain language, very easy thing to read that can follow, Manesh, the project as it moves through business, behavior, and operations, right? That should be the first slide of every deck is who's going to be doing what? Why are we doing this? Because it will make Manesh wants to do thing and he'll do this thing. And it can follow it through and it's very easy to read. Limitations and data make it tougher to read, right? Because we're getting into the nitty gritty of Manesh is between 25 and 35 years old and lives in this place.
On
and has
Tuesdays,
a
he goes,
blah, 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 blah. So we just sort of suck those out and then it's much easier.
We did have a struggling moment earlier on with the word limitations, and we were doing some practice exercises with everybody and, going through the limitations. And initially our limitations thought process was, conditions of what the situation was. Can you talk a little bit more about the use of the word as limitations? Because I think that kind of got us caught up on that. And then
so it's meant to be the limits of the project, meaning if this wasn't true, let's use my Uber example for a second, right? So Allison's the new CEO of Uber, and I go to Allison and I say, well, I think my behavioral statement, I'm the head of marketing. Sorry, Jackie. I'm the new head of marketing. Jackie's
everybody
fine.
got promotions.
I didn't like that job anyway.
Restructure.
Restructure. I'm the new head of marketing. So I go to Allison and I say, well, I'm not going to worry about people who don't have smartphones, right? Because it's an app. If Allison says yes, cool, right? That's a limitation. I don't have to worry about those people. If Allison says no, I want you to get the app for people I want you to find a way for people to order that doesn't involve smartphones, then that's no longer a limitation. And I have to consider those people. So all limitation really means is who am I not serving? And so Manesh, when I help people do this, I often will sit with them and I'll be like, tell me who you wouldn't work with. Imagine the person you wouldn't work with, right? Who's outside of this consideration set? So let's take a B2B project for a second, right? And we're going to get security professionals to do something. Would you work with someone who is in their first security job for the first time and they've been in a month? Would you work with that person? Oh no, you need experience. Do you mean they have to be at least they have to have been doing it for 2 years? Fine, we're going to throw that in as a limitation. So I actually use the who wouldn't you serve, and I try and do extreme outliers. So I try to be imagine this person didn't have a smartphone. Would you be willing to work with them? No, fine, then that's a limitation.
Yeah.
Right. And that helps us scope down. So it's meant to be the limits of the project, not the limits of the person, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We are almost at time. I'm happy to keep us going here for just a few more moments, but I want to be respectful of your time, Matt. So I know we may be at.
I'm fine. You're my last thing of the day. I think I'm going surfing after this. So.
Oh, wow. Well, we don't want to keep you from surfing either. So I do have a couple of rapid fire questions that are fun, unless there's any last thoughts from the crowd here. Otherwise, we can pivot over to some fun stuff. Once, twice, 3 times. Going. Okay. Brene Brown, familiar with? Know her?
I am familiar with.
Just a bit. Okay, so
The
she does
person that
rapid
is
fire
bringing
at
it.
the end of her
But
podcast.
I don't know the lady. I just want to be clear. Like, this is
No.
familiar with is a very general here.
Nope. So I'm going to explain the purpose of rapid fire is just to get quick answers. You are, as I told you earlier, a likely candidate of success in this department. But here we go. First question is reading is fill in the blank.
Fun.
Oh, Manesh, did you hear that? He said it's fun.
We need to take that
Amazing.
snippet and
Use
Well,
it somewhere.
so-
That's for sure.
This is violating the laws of rapid fire, but it is important. I only read fiction. So I
Okay.
made a conscious decision many years ago to only read fiction.
Okay.
I still read, journal studies and those sorts of things in my field, but we'll leave those aside. But like books, it's all fiction. And here's why. At least for me, nonfiction topics, I'd rather watch a talk with the person or talk to the person. Like there's other kinds of things. I believe fundamentally, I went to an international baccalaureate school. International baccalaureate, there's this class you're required to take called Theory of Knowledge, TOK. And one of the things that got asked in TOK is, how do you know art is art, right? And you had to make up a definition for art. And what I made up 20 years ago and still believe, 25 years ago, and still believe is art is anything that is reduced through summation, right? So nonfiction things can frequently be summarized into better and better forms, rather like my 25 slide everything you need to know about behavioral science, right? It can be some. Art is anything where if you tried to if you summarize Romeo and Juliet as like boy and girl fall in love, like it just is totally reduced. And so what I realized is talks, Wikipedia, other sorts of things could get to new summarizations or summations of nonfiction knowledge, but you can't do that with fiction. So if I'm going to spend time reading something, I should spend as much time as possible reading the thing that literally no one else can explain to me. Jason can't explain the book he just read to me, right? He can't explain a movie to me and accurately capture it. It is reduced through his explanation. He can explain it well enough for me to then go want to watch it, right? That's what a preview does. But it is not explaining the art of what's going on. And so I choose to spend the time that I do spend reading only on the things that I cannot get someone else to summarize to me. And that is inherently fiction.
I appreciate that. I stopped reading fiction. I can only read workbooks. So I'm the exact opposite of that. I'm working on it. But
Well, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be reading. It could be watching.
I do listen still. So that's another interesting insight. Okay, second question. A book that you reread or revisit is?
So I have a list of books. I'm a fervent rereader, and I have a list of books that I try and reread repeatedly throughout my life, because rereading them at different points in my life the book doesn't change, I change. And so by having a reference point that I read more than once, I can see how I'm changing.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple. King Rat by James Clavell is a great one. It's a fictionalized, thinly fictionalized story about his own experiences in a POW camp during World War II. Blindness by Jose Saramago is one. Native Speaker, Changrele. Trugali. What other ones do I tend to come back to over and over again over the years? Some of like Barbara Kingsolver's earlier books, like The Bean Trees and stuff are on there for me. They're another one that I read. And the list doesn't really grow because I essentially read all these books when I was 15 for the first time. And because what I really want is to see me grow next to the book. Inherently, there's not newer books on here. Interpreter of Maladies by the short story collection by what's her name? And there's a bunch of different Stephen King short story things on there. I really like short stories as a
Yeah. That's fine. You don't have to give us the whole playlist. I think that suffices for a rapid fire question. Last one, and we may not get an answer that this group was expecting, but your favorite drink to consume while reading.
So I drink at almost all times lemonade. This is like 0 calorie. We have a giant 10-gallon thing of it that I make once a week or so, and then I just drink it throughout the week. It's like 0 calorie Crystal Light kind of thing. And the reason is just basically to get me to drink more water. It's just gets me to drink more water hack. If you wanted a beverage that I sort of reserve for special occasions and things, like a good root beer or cream soda is like a good icy summertime sort of beverage. I don't drink much alcohol. my alcoholic drinks are all things that nobody else drinks. They're like things that don't have names because people are like, that's not a drink. So I really like Grand Marnier and soda, for example, with a lot of ice.
Okay.
Grand Marnier is very because it's made with orange peel. It's got a lot of the sort of like bitter kind of parts coming through that I like. My partner, romantic partner, really likes elderflower, so we do have that around the house. I don't know that I love it, Saint Germain, quite as much as she does, but
probably keep you for another 20 minutes if we just start talking alcohol. Though I'm just
this alcohol. So
this group does like their beverage. So,
well, look,
yeah.
try Grand Marnier and soda, and the other thing that people find weird, but I think is delicious, is Bailey's and soda. It's like drinking like an alcoholic cream soda. It's amazing.
Okay.
Bailey's and cream soda, a lot of ice.
So Matt, if you ever get to the southern part of Africa, there's a Sparletta cream soda, the best cream soda in the world, in my opinion.
I'm making it happen. I actually talked to somebody about going to South Africa earlier today, so I'm making
If
this
you
happen.
go there, they have the best cream soda in the universe. Also, if you ever make it to London Heathrow Airport and someone asks you to sign your book, and it's from Fulton County's library system, that's my book. Bring it back.
I will do what I can, man. I
left it on the plane. I'll be honest
I was
with you.
trying not to out you, Manesh.
So it's there sitting.
I think it's so Manesh, I would choose to believe that you decided to spread the gospel of behavioral science by
That's exactly what I was doing.
I love the thought of things that get left on planes. One of my favorite popcorn questions is, what's the weirdest thing you ever left on a plane? I was flying back from a talk in Wisconsin, and I always had this thing that, when I was running startups, I would bring something back for the team, generally edible from wherever the hell I was. So like if I went to China, I'd bring them back duck tongues or some fun thing. I got like 20 pounds of Wisconsin cheese and left it on the fucking plane. So somewhere, someone has these giant fucking wheels of Wisconsin cheese. It's probably going like, what is happening? And it was a connection flight. So it wasn't like I was coming from Wisconsin. I left them like on the flight from like Texas to New York City or something. Right. And so it would have been some random place where people would be like, why is there giant wheels of cheese?
Yeah.
Mine was a connecting flight also through London. And the weirdest thing I left on a plane was a dozen eggs.
Like eggs? Like regular eggs?
Regular eggs.
Were they cooked? Like
no,
just
no.
like
Why?
Why do you have a dozen eggs, man?
Were you just trying to torture TSA people? What that?
No, this was before that. But coworker had a farm, and he's like, "I'm going to bring you some eggs. You take it back home." And
then you left them. Well, someone got some fresh eggs.
It's not the normal thing you think about taking off the carrying on.
100%. I never put anything in the overhead. That was exactly my problem, Manesh. I never put anything in the overhead, and so then I forgot my cheese was in the overhead. All right.
Random painting on a train, but Allison actually had dropped. She had a meeting as well. Matt, really want to thank you for being here and doing this. It has been a great eye-opening experience reading your book. I actually did read the book. I did not leave it on a plane either. And I put it to work. I put some of the stuff that I've learned from you to work already, and really value what you put out there, and that you took the time to spend with us to talk more about it. Thank you so much. We are starting our next book club on March 3rd, and you should see something if you're in the Product Coffee Slack channel. You should see an opportunity to vote on that very soon. Premium members get to vote. Everybody gets to come. So we hope to see lots of folks back for our next book as well.
Awesome.
And Matt, once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all you're doing. It's an honor tonight. We're happy to have you join our community as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll see y'all